I brought 20 pounds of crabs for my in-laws. My sister-in-law complained they were too small. My mother-in-law told me to exchange them for bigger ones. I immediately took all of them and drove to my own mother's house. 3 hours later, my mother-in-law screamed over the phone, "Where are the crabs?" I answered with a single sentence that left the entire family stunned. I had just set the cooler of crabs down on the kitchen floor. My mother-in-law, Helen, immediately told me to take them back. My sister-in-law, Chloe, who was sitting at the dining table, glanced over and clicked her tongue. "What kind of crabs are these, Alara? They're so small. Once you steam them, there won't be anything left to eat on the claws." I stood there silently for a few seconds, staring at the 20 pounds of blue crabs, still tied and squirming in the styrofoam cooler. An hour ago, I was sweating under the sun at the seafood wharf, picking them out one by one to make sure they were fresh and heavy. But the moment I stepped into my in-laws' house, the first thing I heard was a complaint. What shocked me wasn't the complaint itself, but what happened 10 minutes later. My mother-in-law dragged a plastic chair to the middle of the patio and said, "If you're going to give something decent. Take these back and exchange them for bigger ones. We have guests coming soon." I nodded, then lifted the entire cooler and walked straight to the gate. 3 hours later, the whole house was in a panic, searching for the crabs. My name is Alara. At the time, I was 36 years old and worked as an accountant for a building materials company in the city. My husband, Ethan, was 2 years older. We had been married for almost 8 years. 8 years sounds like a long time, but if you asked me what I remembered most, it probably wouldn't be our wedding day or even the birth of our child, but the family dinners. Outsiders would think my husband's family was perfectly fine. My in-laws, Arthur and Helen, had a spacious 2-story house. Ethan was the eldest son. His sister, Chloe, wasn't married yet. From the outside, everything looked normal. Only those living inside understood. Every meal felt like a board meeting without minutes. It would start with the rising price of vegetables at the supermarket and move to the neighbors renovating their house. Then, somehow, the topic of conversation always circled back to me. Sometimes it was about me coming home late from work, other times about me not having a second child yet. Sometimes it was about the curtains I bought, how the color clashed with the whole vibe of the room. Trivial things that, if I told anyone, they would probably laugh. But when it happens every day, it's no longer trivial. I often tried to calm myself. Everyone has their own personality. My mother-in-law, Helen, was very frugal. She had gone through hard times, so she was obsessed with keeping up appearances. In her mind, the family had to maintain a certain image in front of relatives, especially whenever guests were over. Chloe was different. She wasn't a bad person, just spoiled since childhood. At home, her mother doted on her. Outside, her older brother protected her. She was used to being the center of attention. I understood that, I really did. So much so that I often gave in before I was even asked. But understanding didn't mean I wasn't tired. That morning was a Saturday. I had just received my quarterly bonus from work. It wasn't much, just enough for a nice family meal. I thought hard and then decided to stop by the seafood market. My mother-in-law loves crab, and my father-in-law does too. So I bought 20 pounds. The fishmonger even laughed. "That's a lot, ma'am. Must be a big party at the house." I laughed along. "No, sir. Just for a family dinner." The man looked at me in disbelief. To be honest, I felt it was a bit excessive myself, but I was in a good mood. It was one of those simple joys. Working hard all quarter, getting a bonus, and then bringing home something delicious for the family. That's all. On the way home, I even stopped to buy ingredients for a salad, a few types of fruit, and some bottles of soda. The trunk of my car was full. The June sun felt like it was melting the asphalt. As I drove, I pictured the whole family gathering that evening, enjoying steamed crabs. However, the moment I stepped onto the patio, I heard Chloe's voice. "Ugh, the crabs are so small." I thought she was joking. Until my mother-in-law came closer, picked up a crab, turned it over, and put it back. "Take them back." I was stunned. "What?" "It won't look good for the guests tonight." I stared at her. "Are we having guests, Helen?" "Yes. Your uncle's family from out of town is coming." I genuinely didn't know. If I had known there would be guests, I would have asked them first. But what annoyed me wasn't that there were guests, but the way they looked at my sincere gesture, like it was a product that failed quality control. I still tried to keep my tone even. "They're alive and heavy, Helen. They must be full of meat." Helen shook her head. "The first thing guests notice is the size." Chloe, sitting nearby, chimed in. She's right, Alara. Nobody eats small crabs these days. I turned to her. She was engrossed in her phone, not even looking up. A strange feeling crept into my heart, like a scratch on a glass surface. Not painful, but grating. Suddenly, I remembered last month when I bought a box of artisanal chocolates, and Chloe complained the brand wasn't famous. 2 months ago, I bought a new set of dinner plates. My mother-in-law said the color was tacky. 3 months ago, I ordered catering for my father-in-law's birthday. Chloe said the restaurant wasn't high class. Those little things piled up, bit by bit. They seemed trivial every day, but when I finally realized it, my heart was already overflowing. Ethan was on the porch at the time, fixing a fan. Hearing our conversation, he came inside. It's okay. If Mom wants bigger ones, you can go exchange them, Alara. I looked at my husband. He said it gently, as if trying to mediate, but it was precisely that sentence that made me realize one thing. No one in this house thought the request was wrong. They all considered it normal. Without realizing it, I let out a small laugh, a very quiet laugh. My mother-in-law stared at me. What's so funny? Nothing, Helen. I bent down and lifted the cooler of crabs. You want bigger ones, right? Yes. All right. I turned and walked straight to the gate. Chloe still had time to shout from behind. Alara, don't forget to get the big-clawed blue crabs. I didn't answer. I started my car and drove out of the neighborhood. The afternoon wind hit my face. I drove for nearly 30 minutes, not back to the market, but straight to my mother's house. My mom's house was in the next county, a modest home by a small creek. When I arrived, she was picking vegetables in her garden. Seeing me carrying a large cooler, she was surprised. What's this? It's so heavy, Alara. I opened the lid. A few crabs immediately crawled out. My mom's eyes widened. Oh my goodness. I sank wearily into a chair. Sweat soaked the back of my shirt. My mom looked at me for a moment, and then asked, "What's wrong?" I told her everything from beginning to end, calmly, without adding or subtracting anything. After hearing my story, my mom was silent. A moment later, she stood up and grabbed a large basin. "Let me call your Aunt Carol and Uncle Ray to come over." I was confused. "What for, Mom?" 20 pounds of crabs. You think the two of us are going to eat this until Christmas? I laughed for the first time that day. In less than half an hour, my mom's yard was bustling. Aunt Carol came with a head of lettuce. Uncle Ray brought a bottle of craft beer. My cousin, whose house wasn't far, heard the news and came over on his bike to help prepare the crabs. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the yard. No one asked if the crabs were big or small. They only asked if we had enough Old Bay seasoning for the boil. While I was busy washing the crabs, my phone vibrated. It was Ethan. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. On the other end, I heard my mother-in-law's voice. "Alara, where are the crabs?" I glanced at the steaming pot on the stove and replied slowly. "I took them to a place where they'd be appreciated, Helen." There was silence on the other end. Just then, I heard the sound of a car braking sharply in front of the gate. Someone got out. Their face was full of panic, making everyone in my mom's yard turn to look. Just as I finished speaking, the person from the gate rushed into the yard. It was Ethan. Sweat soaked his shirt, his hair a mess from the midday drive. Seeing the steaming pot, he froze for a few seconds. The yard was lively. My mother was washing vegetables. Aunt Carol was making a potato salad. Uncle Ray was crouching down, lighting a charcoal grill. A few of my older cousins were even pulling a plastic table out from inside the house. The atmosphere was festive, like a family cookout. Ethan looked around, and then his eyes landed on me. His gaze wasn't angry, nor was it blaming. It was more like someone who had just realized something had gone far beyond their calculations. "Why did you bring them all here?" "Because there are people here who want to eat them," I said, putting down the basin of crabs. He fell silent. The sound of the crabs moving in the basin was clear. A moment later, he approached. "You know Mom is expecting guests. I only found out this morning." "Well, we can still take them back now." I looked at my husband. "It's almost 20 miles from here to there. Take them back for what?" He was at a loss for words. He clearly understood what I meant. The problem wasn't the 20 pounds of crabs, but the way people treated sincerity. My mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and pulled up a chair. "Sit down, Ethan. Have something to drink." "No need, Mom, I'm fine," he replied politely. "It's so hot out. Sit down and rest for a minute." My mother was like that. She rarely interfered in her children's affairs, but she would never let a guest stand in the middle of the yard. Ethan finally sat down. A glass of iced tea was placed in front of him. No one mentioned the crabs again. Aunt Carol continued to talk about her neighbor who was renovating their house. Uncle Ray burst out laughing because his finger had just been pinched by a crab. The atmosphere was so natural, as if nothing had happened. That's precisely what made Ethan feel awkward. Because at his house right now, things must be chaotic. The phone in his pocket vibrated continuously. The screen lit up and went dark repeatedly. I knew who was calling. A moment later, he stood up. Alara, can we talk outside for a second? I followed him. We both stood under a large oak tree by the gate. The small creek in front of us reflected the sunlight. A flock of ducks swam by peacefully. Everything felt so serene. Ethan sighed. What you did back there was a bit extreme. I stared at the water's surface. You think so? The guests will be here soon. What does that have to do with me? He was stunned. It was the first time in years I had spoken to him in that tone. Not loud, not angry, but very clear. He slowly sat down on the edge of the embankment. I know you're disappointed. Do you really know? Did you just figure that out today? Or have you known for a long time? He couldn't answer. A gentle breeze rustled the oak leaves. Suddenly, I felt sorry for my husband. He was fundamentally a good person. He had grown up in a family that prized harmony above all else. If there was a problem, he chose to give in a little, be patient a little, and hope everything would blow over. But often, his patience just shifted the burden onto the person closest to him. I looked at him. Ethan. Yeah? If I bought you a gift, and then I criticized it relentlessly, how would you feel? He gave a wry smile. Annoyed, of course. What if I did it continuously for 8 years? He fell silent. I didn't press the point. Some things only need to be said once. Those who want to understand will understand. Those who don't, you could tell them 10 times and it would be the same. His phone rang again. This time, he answered it. My mother-in-law's voice was so loud I could hear it from several feet away. Ethan, where are you? At Alara's mom's house. Have you gotten the crabs and come home yet? He looked at me. I looked away. From the other end, we heard again. The guests have arrived. Which guests, Mom? Your uncle's family. There was a moment of silence. Suddenly, I heard an old man's voice over the phone. Hello? What crabs? Crabs from where? It was Uncle Ray. Laughter followed. You guys think I came all this way for a feast? I was just stopping by to say hello. I already ate on the way. Ethan and I looked at each other. He turned on the speakerphone. Uncle Ray's voice was clear. I'm just here to visit. I was full from lunch on the road. My mother-in-law sounded a bit flustered. But we prepared things at home. Oh, don't go to any trouble. I'll eat whatever you have. Then another woman's voice chimed in, probably my great aunt. I'd rather have a simple vegetable broth than all that rich crab anyway. Laughter erupted again on the other end. Ethan's face slowly changed. Maybe it was only then that he realized something. People were busy worrying about appearances, worried guests would criticize, worried the dishes weren't fancy enough, while the guests themselves couldn't care less. The call ended. He sat in silence for a very long time. I went back to the yard. The crabs in the pot were starting to cook. The aroma spread everywhere. Aunt Carol laughed. Alara, these crabs must be full of meat. Of course, each one is as heavy as a rock. Everyone laughed. Even Ethan managed a faint smile. Lunch that day was more enjoyable than I could have imagined. On a plastic table under the shade of a tree were steamed crabs, boiled corn on the cob, and a shaker of Old Bay. Simple, but delicious. My mother sat at the head of the table, cracking crabs and passing the claws to everyone. I looked at her, my heart feeling incredibly light. There are things that, when you're in the same environment for too long, you start to think are normal. It's only when you step into another place that you realize the difference. The difference between being appreciated and being taken for granted. As we were finishing lunch, my phone vibrated. It was Chloe's number. I was a bit surprised, as she rarely called me. I answered. There were a few seconds of silence on the other end. Then Chloe's voice came. Are you still mad, Alara? Before I could answer, Chloe continued. I was just kidding earlier. I looked out at the cornfields in the distance. Oh, really? Yeah. I didn't think you'd actually take them and leave. That's because I thought you were serious with your criticism. Chloe laughed awkwardly. You get so emotional, don't you? I didn't answer because I myself didn't know if my actions today were because I was offended or just tired. So tired that I didn't want to explain anything anymore. Chloe spoke again. Mom's really sad, you know. Oh yeah? Sad because there are no crabs or sad because she was embarrassed? The line went silent. I heard a soft sigh. After a long pause, she answered, maybe both. Unconsciously, I laughed. This time, I really couldn't hold it back. Chloe laughed too. We had never had a conversation this strange before. Before hanging up, she suddenly asked, Alara, do you hate me? No. I looked at the pile of crab shells on the table, then at my mother, who was collecting the claws to make soup for later. No, seriously. Seriously? I thought you'd hated me for a long time. I replied slowly, you only hate people if you still care. Chloe said nothing more. The call ended. The afternoon passed peacefully. Around 4 o'clock, Ethan got ready to leave. He stood by his car for a long time, looking like he wanted to say something. Finally, he spoke. Are you coming home tonight? I looked at him. Do you want me to come home? He smiled. A very tired smile. I want you to come home, but I have a feeling you don't want to yet. I nodded. Let me stay here tonight. He didn't push it, just started the car. Before he left, he looked back and said, I'll pick you up tomorrow. I watched his car disappear behind a row of poplar trees. A strange feeling washed over me. It felt like after years of silence, something had finally opened up, but I didn't have time to think further when my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother-in-law's number. I was a bit shocked because since I got married, she had very rarely called me directly. I answered it. There was no immediate voice on the other end, just a heavy sigh. Then, Helen's voice, softer than usual, came through. Can you come home for a bit? I was stunned. What is it, Helen? There was a long, strange silence on the other end. Then she said quietly, your father-in-law just collapsed. I nearly jumped out of my chair. The phone in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy. What did you just say? Your father-in-law just collapsed in the living room. My heart pounded. All the anger, sadness, and disappointment from that morning vanished in an instant. I looked at my mother. She was already looking at me. Just by the look on my face, she knew something was wrong. Mom, I have to go to my in-laws' house for a bit. My mom immediately stood up. What's wrong with your father-in-law? I don't know the details yet. Well, go on then. If anything happens, call me. I rushed to grab my bag. Just then, Ethan called. His voice was more tense than before. I'm on my way back home now. Are you there yet? I'm just about to leave. Dad's conscious, but he's still weak. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least he was awake. What happened to him? We don't know. He was just sitting there drinking tea and suddenly slumped onto the sofa. I didn't ask any more questions. 15 minutes later, I arrived in front of my in-laws' house. The scene was different from the morning. There was no laughter, no guests. The iron gate was wide open. My mother-in-law was sitting on the porch. Her usually neat hair was slightly disheveled. Seeing me, she immediately stood up. Go inside, see your father. I hurried into the living room. My father-in-law, Arthur, was lying on the long sofa, his face pale. Chloe sat beside him. On the table was a glass of sweet tea, only slightly sipped. He saw me and tried to smile. You're back. Arthur, how are you feeling? Better. He smiled, but his voice was weak. I sat down beside him. In all my years as a daughter-in-law, how the others in this house treated me was one thing, but my father-in-law had always been the kindest. He didn't talk much, rarely interfered, but he never made me feel awkward. Once, when I was newly married, I cooked a dish that was too salty. My mother-in-law sulked through the whole meal. Only he quietly finished 2 plates of rice and then said, eating something salty once in a while is good for your health. I knew then that he was defending me. Over 8 years, things like that happened often. So, seeing him lying there, my heart was genuinely worried. About half an hour later, Ethan arrived with a doctor from the neighborhood clinic. After taking his blood pressure and doing a brief examination, the doctor sat down. Was his eating irregular today? My mother-in-law quickly answered. We had guests today, so it was a bit hectic, doctor. What did he have for lunch? The entire room fell silent. I looked around and realized no one had eaten properly in this house today. Everyone was preoccupied with the crabs, the guests, their pride, and figuring out where I had gone. By the time the guests arrived, some had lost their appetite, some were annoyed, and some were embarrassed. Lunch was practically skipped. The doctor shook his head. An older person can't afford to miss meals. Hearing that, Chloe looked down. My mother-in-law also said nothing. The doctor gave a few more instructions and then left. The house was quiet again. I went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. It was still nearly full, just as I had left it that morning. The vegetables were there, the fruit was there, the sodas were there. Only the 20 pounds of crabs were missing. I turned on the stove to cook some simple chicken broth with rice. Chloe followed me and stood at the kitchen doorway for a long time before whispering, "Alara." "Yes?" I continued to stir the broth. "I'm sorry." My hand stopped for a moment. This was the first time Chloe had voluntarily apologized since I became her sister-in-law. I turned to look at her, seeing her head bowed. She was genuinely sincere. It wasn't just a formality, not forced. Guilt was clearly written on her face. "Sorry for what? About the crabs?" I didn't answer. Chloe continued. "Actually, I thought the crabs were fine. Then why did you join in the criticism?" She looked embarrassed. "Mom started it." I laughed. "You're over 30 years old. If someone else criticizes something, do you have to join in?" Chloe's face turned red. Growing up, it was likely no one had ever spoken to her so bluntly. I poured the broth into a bowl and placed it on a tray. "Take this upstairs for your father." Chloe took it. After a few steps, she turned back. "Alara? What now? Do you think I'm really annoying?" This time I burst out laughing. My laughter filled the kitchen. "If you have to ask that, it means you already know the answer, don't you?" Chloe was stunned for a few seconds. Then she herself started to laugh. A laugh that was very different from her usual one. There was no longer the spoiled tone I was used to hearing. That night passed peacefully. The guests had left in the afternoon. My father-in-law felt better after eating the broth. Around 9 o'clock, we were all sitting on the patio. No one mentioned the crabs, but everyone knew that issue was still between us. My mother-in-law sat in a plastic chair. She would occasionally glance at me and then look away, as if wanting to say something but not knowing where to start. Only after Chloe went inside did she speak. "Are you still angry with me?" I was a bit surprised, as she rarely initiated conversations first. I put down my teacup. "No, Helen. Honestly." I looked at her under the patio light. Her face seemed more wrinkled. Perhaps because of the worry over her husband, she looked like she had aged several years today. Suddenly, I thought of my own mother, how she had worked so hard to raise us, and my heart softened. "I'm not angry." "Then why did you take the crabs?" I paused for a moment before answering, because at that moment, I felt hurt. My mother-in-law looked down. The sound of crickets came from the garden. "I've been thinking a lot since this morning," she said slowly. "I know you were sincere." I said nothing. She continued. "When I was young, life was very hard. You know that, right? Every time we had guests, I was always worried." She stared into the distance. "Even a single fish had to be the biggest one. Even one watermelon had to be the best one. It became a habit." Her voice trailed off. "Maybe I worry too much about what other people think." I looked at her. It was the first time I had heard her speak so honestly. Not advising, not criticizing, not giving input, but talking about herself. A strange feeling washed over me. It was as if I was seeing another side of this woman, no longer as my mother-in-law, but just as a woman who had lived for so long in fear of scarcity that she sometimes forgot what was most important was right in front of her. Just then, from inside the house, a phone rang. Chloe ran out. "Mom! A call from Uncle Walter!" Hearing that name, my mother-in-law's expression immediately changed. My father-in-law also sat up straighter. Even Ethan lifted his head. I was a bit puzzled because Uncle Walter was my father-in-law's youngest brother. He had rarely visited in recent years. Word was he was working out of state in North Dakota. My mother-in-law took the call. At first, she just hummed in agreement. "Yes, yes." Gradually, her face grew pale, the phone in her hand trembling slightly. "Is that true?" The atmosphere on the patio immediately tensed. Everyone stared at her. After a moment, the call ended. My mother-in-law sank weakly into her chair. Chloe was impatient. "What is it, Mom?" She turned to my father-in-law, her voice hoarse. "Arthur. Our land back home." The entire patio fell silent. She swallowed hard, then slowly enunciated each word. "They just got word. It's being acquired." The teacup in my father-in-law's hand fell to the floor and shattered into pieces. Meanwhile, Ethan shot to his feet upon hearing the compensation amount Uncle Walter had just mentioned over the phone. $6 million. Ethan said it almost unconsciously. The entire yard fell silent. The sound of the night insects was still there. The fan in the living room was still spinning, but no one paid attention to those sounds anymore. $6 million. For many people, that number might just be a string of zeros. But for this family, it felt like a fierce wind blowing away all existing tranquility. My father-in-law steadied himself on his chair. 6 million? For real? My mother-in-law nodded. Walter just came from the county office. Chloe was dumbfounded. That much, Mom? Oh my God. Chloe sank weakly into her chair. I quietly observed them. In everyone's eyes, a different emotion flickered. My father-in-law was in disbelief. My mother-in-law was bewildered. Chloe was ecstatic. Meanwhile, Ethan was lost in thought. And me? I suddenly remembered that piece of land. The land in Ethan's hometown that had been nearly abandoned for over 20 years. Every year, it was just cleared of weeds a few times. There had even been plans to sell it because no one was taking care of it. Who would have thought that today, news of an eminent domain buyout would arrive? My mother-in-law picked up her phone. Walter said a new highway project is going through it. My father-in-law nodded slowly. How big is our plot? Almost 7 acres. Chloe's eyes sparkled. Wow, so we're rich overnight. That sentence made everyone chuckle. The atmosphere lightened a bit. But I noticed my father-in-law's laughter didn't last long. He just smiled briefly, and then went back to his thoughts. People with experience are like that. They understand. Money not yet in hand is still just a plan. The journey was still long. As 10 o'clock approached, everyone went back to their rooms. Ethan and I went upstairs. It had been a long time since we had a chance to talk alone like this. He sat leaning against the headboard, while I sat at my vanity, taking out my hairpins. The night air blew gently from the window. After a long silence, he finally spoke. You really surprised me today, Alara. I looked in the mirror. About the crabs? Yeah. Were you angry? He shook his head. At first, yes. But now? Now, I think you had a point. I turned around. Just a point? He laughed. Okay, I was wrong. This time it was my turn to be surprised. Ethan rarely admitted he was wrong so quickly. Maybe today's events had made him think a lot. He stared at the ceiling. This afternoon, sitting at your mom's house, I felt a little ashamed. Why? Because I realized how much you've been putting up with for so long. I said nothing. The words came late, but it was better than never. He continued. I thought everything was fine. What family doesn't have problems? I figured it would all work out eventually. I smiled faintly. There's a saying, Ethan. What's that? A small splinter in your hand might not kill you. But if you leave it in for 8 years, it still hurts. He was silent. I knew he understood. That night, we talked for a very long time. Not arguing, not blaming, just telling each other things that had never been said. There's a distance in marriage that's created not by betrayal or money, but by the habit of guessing each other's thoughts instead of listening to each other. I finally fell asleep close to midnight, but the next morning, as soon as I opened my eyes, I heard voices downstairs. It was very noisy. I stepped out onto the balcony. Below, there were 3 more guests. A man in his 50s, a woman close to 50, and a young man around 30. My father-in-law was with them. My mother-in-law was pouring tea, while Chloe sat beside her laughing. I turned to Ethan. Who is that? He looked down. Uncle Walter. I was a bit surprised. They had arrived so early. It must be about the land. Sure enough, less than 10 minutes after breakfast, the main topic emerged. The man put down his teacup. Arthur, he began. My father-in-law looked up. Yes, this land is our parents' inheritance. It is. So I think we need to talk about the compensation properly. My father-in-law nodded. It does need to be discussed. Everyone fell silent, listening. His brother-in-law continued, we didn't sell it before because the price was low. Now the price is good. It's best we sit down together as siblings. I saw my father-in-law's expression change slightly, not annoyed, but wary. He knew his brother well. Uncle Walter's family had rarely visited for years. Even for holidays, they only stopped by briefly. They rarely came to family gatherings. Now, as soon as they heard about the compensation, they showed up first thing in the morning. It naturally made one think. Chloe naively asked, So what are you proposing, Uncle? The man laughed. I'm not proposing anything. It's just that our parents left that land for all their descendants. It should be divided fairly. His words sounded gentle, but everyone in the yard understood his meaning. The atmosphere began to shift. My father-in-law slowly sipped his tea. Whose name is on the deed? His brother was slightly taken aback. Well, your name, Arthur. Then it's already clear. He put down his teacup, his voice calm. We'll just follow the law. The woman who came with him immediately interjected. Arthur, why are you being so formal? We're family. My father-in-law smiled. That's right, we are family. That's why when Walter built his house, I lent him $20,000 that I still haven't seen back. The atmosphere instantly froze. I almost laughed. Older people are like that, usually quiet, but when they speak, they are incredibly sharp and to the point. The woman's face turned red. The young man with her looked down and drank his tea. The conversation had shifted quickly, but I knew this was just the beginning. The news of the compensation was less than a day old, and someone had already come. The following days would surely bring more. As I suspected, that afternoon, my mother-in-law's phone rang nonstop. Relatives from their hometown called, distant cousins called, acquaintances called. Everyone was asking, everyone was congratulating. Some even asked directly, when is the money coming? It was ridiculous. We hadn't even seen the money, and other people were already trying to spend it. Later that afternoon, something else happened. I was cooking in the kitchen when I heard a car stop at the gate. Chloe ran to the front. A moment later, she came back in a hurry. Mom, someone's here to buy the land. Instantly, everyone in the house looked up. Buy the land? Yes. My mother-in-law was surprised. The news spreads fast. Chloe nodded. They're from a real estate company. My father-in-law stood up immediately. In the yard stood two men in white shirts. One was about 40, the other younger. They greeted us politely and handed over their business cards. The older man smiled. We heard there's going to be a land acquisition in this area. We wanted to have an early discussion with the family. My father-in-law looked at the business card. A discussion about what? We'd like to offer a down payment for the rights to the compensation. Hearing that, even I was shocked. Everything was happening faster than I had imagined. The man opened his briefcase, took out a stack of documents, and then named a figure. Instantly, everyone in the room looked at each other. Even my mother-in-law was stunned because the amount they offered was nearly $1 million higher than the estimated compensation value. Chloe nearly dropped her glass. My mother-in-law took a deep breath, while my father-in-law said nothing. He just stared intently at the stack of papers on the table for a long time, then suddenly turned to me. His gaze was fixed on me, which surprised everyone. I myself didn't understand why. He said slowly, Alara. Yes, Arthur? Please, check these papers for me. The living room fell silent. Since I had joined the family, my father-in-law had never actively sought my opinion on financial matters like this. Meanwhile, the representative from the real estate company smiled faintly, as if he had anticipated that the final decision of this family would not come from the people who talked the most. All eyes in the living room were on me. The moment was brief, but I could feel the change in everyone's gaze. Chloe was surprised. My mother-in-law was a bit taken aback, and the two guests from the real estate company were observing me carefully. Even Ethan looked at me with surprise. Because for as long as I could remember, matters of land or money in this family were almost always decided by my father-in-law. I was just a listener or an advisor if asked. He had never actively handed me documents to review in front of everyone like this. I took the folder and opened it, leafing through the pages. My experience as an accountant had trained me to check the details before looking at the big numbers. The man across from me was still smiling politely. He waited patiently while I read every line carefully. The more I read, the more I felt that something was off. About 5 minutes later, I closed the folder. My father-in-law asked, How is it, Alara? I looked at him. Do you really want to sell it, Arthur? The man from the real estate company immediately interjected. We're making a very good offer. I nodded. Yes, sir. The offer is good. He smiled. It's so good, in fact, that it makes me suspicious. The smile on his face stiffened slightly. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. I continued. There has been no official decision on this land yet. Correct. The compensation value is also just an estimate. Correct. But your company is willing to pay almost $1 million more. The man was still trying to remain calm. That's our investment strategy. I nodded slowly. Or perhaps you know something our family doesn't know yet. This time he didn't answer immediately, just smiled. The smile of a master negotiator. But it was his silence that made my father-in-law understand the problem. He pushed the folder back towards his guests. Give me some time to think. The man knew he couldn't push any further. He stood up. All right, we'll take our leave. Before leaving, he left his business card, hoping the family would reconsider. As soon as the gate closed, Chloe sighed. Oh my God, I thought we were about to be millionaires. Ethan laughed. Money doesn't come that easily. My mother-in-law looked at me. Do you really feel like something's wrong? I nodded. Yes, Helen. But what? I don't know yet. I really didn't know. I just had a feeling that behind all this, there was something undisclosed. No business person would willingly lose almost $1 million just to be kind. There had to be a reason. That night, we had a late dinner. The conversation was still about the land. Chloe kept searching the internet for information on land prices and city development plans. One article made her gasp. Mom, if they really build a highway, the land prices around here could go up even more. My mother-in-law listened with sparkling eyes. Really, dear? Is that what it says online? My father-in-law put down his bowl. Don't believe everything you see on the internet. Chloe pouted. I'm just reading, Dad. The atmosphere was more relaxed than in previous days, but I still noticed one thing. Since the news of the compensation, everyone had started to change. Not big changes, just small ones that were unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention. My mother-in-law was often calculating things. My father-in-law was more lost in thought. Chloe was constantly calling her friends. Even Ethan seemed quieter. Money is strange. When there isn't any, everyone is calm. The moment you hear it's coming, people's hearts begin to stir. 3 days later, while I was at the office, my mother-in-law called. Her voice was a bit rushed. Are you working? Yes, Helen. Can you come home a little early this afternoon? What's wrong? We have a guest. I was a bit puzzled. For the past few days, guests had been coming and going, from relatives to land brokers. I figured it must be another land-related matter. But when I got home, I realized my assumption was wrong. Sitting in the living room was a woman in her 50s. She was dressed elegantly, wearing a lot of jewelry. Beside her sat a girl of about 28. She had fair skin and a pretty face. I had never met them before. Seeing me enter, they both turned. My mother-in-law smiled broadly. Ah, Ilara is home. I greeted them and then sat down. The atmosphere was a bit strange. Everyone was smiling, but no one was getting to the point. A moment later, the woman spoke. This is your daughter-in-law, Arthur and Helen? Yes. She's very beautiful. I thanked her politely, but inside I was still confused. About 10 minutes later, after the guests had left, I finally asked, Who was that, Helen? Chloe immediately cut in. They're from the County Historical Society. I was stunned. The Historical Society? Chloe rolled her eyes and laughed. Yeah. They heard about the new highway project and wanted to ask if our family had any old photos of the area before the land gets demolished. Uncle Walter told them to come here. I breathed a sigh of relief. Walter's son was a few years older than Chloe and still unmarried. My mother-in-law nodded. Their family is well off. They said their land is also in the acquisition area. I suddenly laughed. Just a few days ago, everyone was fighting about crabs. Now it had shifted to land and matchmaking. Life really does change so quickly. I thought the story would end there. It didn't. That night, something else happened. While we were having dinner, my father-in-law's phone rang. It was from Uncle Walter. Just a few minutes into the conversation, his expression changed. What? His voice lowered. Everyone at the table stared at him. A moment later, he put down the phone. No one asked, but everyone was waiting. My father-in-law took a sip of water and then said slowly, There's a problem with our land. Chloe put her spoon down with a clatter. What kind of problem? Grandpa left 2 versions of the land title. The dinner table instantly fell silent. I turned to Ethan. He also looked confused. My father-in-law continued. One version is here at our house. The other one is with Walter. My mother-in-law frowned. And in the document Walter has, it lists both our names. Chloe was aghast. Does that mean it's split 50-50, Dad? He shook his head. Not necessarily. I listened with a chill running down my spine. This was what I feared most. The money hadn't arrived, but a dispute was already at our doorstep. And family disputes are always the hardest to resolve because they don't just involve documents, but also feelings, old stories, and debts of gratitude from decades ago. My mother-in-law stood up abruptly. That can't be. That land has been in my husband's name since we got married. My father-in-law sighed. I know, but we have to see the document. Chloe was anxious. What if Uncle Walter sues us? No one answered. The dinner lost its appeal. I looked at everyone. An uneasy feeling washed over me. Sure enough, the next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I heard a car at the gate. A black SUV pulled up in front of the house. The person who got out was not just Uncle Walter, but also a man in a white shirt carrying a folder. The moment I saw him, I recognized him. He was the representative from the real estate company who had come a few days ago. He was smiling. Meanwhile, Uncle Walter, holding a stack of old yellowed papers, strode straight into the yard. "Arthur?" His voice was loud and clear. "I brought the papers today." My father-in-law came out from inside the house. His eyes were fixed on the stack of papers. Meanwhile, I noticed the smile on the man standing behind him was becoming harder and harder to read. It was as if he had been waiting for this day for a long time. The moment the stack of old papers was placed on the table, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy. Uncle Walter didn't sit down immediately. He stood beside a chair, one hand on his hip, the other on the pile of yellowed documents. The man from the real estate company stood behind him with a calm face, as if watching a play for which he had already read the script. My father-in-law approached. He didn't touch the papers right away, just stared at them for a long time. My mother-in-law came out of the kitchen. Chloe peeked from the doorway, and Ethan had just come down from upstairs. Everyone understood this would not be an ordinary morning. Uncle Walter cleared his throat. "Arthur, take a look." My father-in-law pulled up a chair and sat down, slowly unfolding the stack of papers. I stood behind him. The first paper was an old copy, with a stamp from many years ago. The second was a statement of the land's history. The third was an inheritance distribution letter from the time Ethan's grandparents were still alive. Everyone leaned in to look. The more he read, the more serious my father-in-law's expression became. A moment later, he put the papers down without saying a word. His silence was more frightening than an argument. My mother-in-law couldn't wait. "Well, Arthur? Say something." My father-in-law looked up. "This document is authentic." Chloe gasped. The entire room felt like it had frozen. Uncle Walter sighed in relief, as if he had been waiting for that sentence for a long time. "See? I wasn't making it up." My mother-in-law came closer and snatched the papers. She read them, page by page. Her lips were tightly shut. I knew she was trying to find a loophole to argue, but then her hand holding the papers slowed. It was clear she herself realized the document was legitimate. After a few minutes, she placed it back on the table. "But the deed is still in my husband's name." Uncle Walter nodded. "That's true. So what's the plan?" "The name on the deed is one thing. The history of the land is another." The atmosphere tensed again. The man from the real estate company remained silent, occasionally adjusting his collar, observing, listening, as if waiting for the right moment to jump in. Suddenly, my father-in-law turned to me. "Alara." "Yes, Arthur? Please read it again carefully." I sat down and took the stack of papers. This time, I read them even more slowly. Every line, every word, every official stamp. About 10 minutes later, I closed it. Something was beginning to form in my mind. Something small, but illogical. I looked up. "Uncle Walter, may I ask you a question?" Uncle Walter looked at me. "Go ahead. This document. How long have you had it?" "Over 20 years. "Then why are you only bringing it out now?" The entire room fell silent. Even the man from the real estate company frowned slightly. Uncle Walter was taken aback. Only for a moment, but I saw it. He smiled awkwardly. "It wasn't necessary before." I nodded. "But when the land price was low, you never mentioned it either." Chloe unconsciously glanced at her uncle. Ethan also started to think. I continued. "If this document was so important, it should have been brought out a long time ago." Uncle Walter looked uncomfortable. "Well, the opportunity just came up now." I didn't press further, but a huge question mark appeared in my mind. A person can forget a piece of paper, can forget a promise, but it's very difficult to forget one's right to millions of dollars. My father-in-law sat silently, his fingers tapping the table. He understood my point. Not just him, but the man from the real estate company understood too. And that understanding was what made him start to worry, because things weren't going according to his plan. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was a text from my old friend Alex, who worked at the county records office. Last night, I had messaged him to ask for some information about the land. I excused myself to take a call. On the other end, Alex spoke quickly. "Hey, Alara. Sorry, I was busy yesterday. Just got a chance to call back." "No problem, Alex. You were asking about that land in Oak Ridge County, right?" "That's right. It's strange, Alara." I was taken aback. "Strange how?" 3 months ago, someone already came asking about the files for that area. I frowned. "Who?" Not sure, but they asked for a lot of detail, even photocopied many documents. I stood still on the porch, a cold feeling creeping up my spine. 3 months ago, that meant even before our family knew about the compensation. I asked again, "Do you know which company they were from?" "I do. Hold on, I'll send you a photo of the request form." In less than a minute, a photo appeared on my phone. I saw the logo in the corner of the letterhead. My heart pounded. It was the company whose representative was sitting in my house right now. I immediately looked up through the window. The man was still calmly drinking his tea. His face was completely relaxed. But now I knew he wasn't as simple as he appeared. I went back into the living room. Everyone looked at me. My father-in-law asked, "What is it, Alara?" I put my phone on the table and opened the photo. "Arthur, look at this." He took it. A few seconds later, his expression changed drastically. My mother-in-law and Chloe leaned in to see. The man from the real estate company began to sit up straighter. My father-in-law asked slowly, 3 months ago, your company was already researching this land?" The man smiled. "That's standard practice, sir. We do market research." I stared straight at him, which means you already knew about the city's development plans beforehand. He didn't answer right away. His silence was the answer. Instantly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Chloe was wide-eyed. So they already knew. Ethan began to understand the problem. If this company knew about the development plans in advance, if they knew the land price would skyrocket, if they knew the compensation would be higher than estimated, then their offer of $1 million more wasn't generosity, it was a trap. My father-in-law slammed his phone on the table. For the first time since this whole mess began, I saw him truly angry. "I'm not selling." The man stood up immediately. "You should reconsider, sir." I said no. "This is a great opportunity." My father-in-law looked him straight in the eye. A great opportunity for whom? No one spoke again. The man knew he had failed. He gathered his documents, stood up, and gave a curt nod. Before leaving, he glanced at Uncle Walter. A very quick glance, but I saw it. And I knew these two men were not the strangers they pretended to be. The car left the gate. The house was still silent. A moment later, Chloe was the one to speak. "I feel like something is weird." My mother-in-law sighed. "Me too." My father-in-law turned to his brother. His gaze this time was very different. No longer the look of an older brother to his younger one, but the look of someone seeking the truth. "Walter, you knew that man before, didn't you?" Uncle Walter was startled. "No, that's not true." He smiled awkwardly, but his smile was no longer natural. My father-in-law didn't ask again, just stared at him for a long time. It was that stare that made Uncle Walter start to panic. Sweat began to form on his forehead. His hands unconsciously gripped the edge of his chair. Sitting next to him, I suddenly thought of something. Maybe this land issue wasn't just an inheritance dispute. Maybe there was another secret behind it. A secret that would make someone prepare for it months in advance. And just at that moment, the screen of Uncle Walter's phone suddenly lit up. He hadn't had time to grab it, but everyone clearly saw the message that appeared on the lock screen. The sender was the director of the real estate company who had just left, and the content was just one short sentence. "Remember to stick to our agreement." Instantly, the entire room froze. The message only appeared for a few seconds, but every word seemed to be seared into everyone's eyes. "Remember to stick to our agreement." No one spoke. No one moved. Even Uncle Walter was frozen stiff. He hurriedly grabbed his phone, but it was too late. My father-in-law looked at his brother, his gaze frighteningly calm. The calmer he was, the more pressure he put on others. Uncle Walter swallowed hard. "Arthur." My father-in-law cut him off. "What agreement?" Uncle Walter stammered. It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" My mother-in-law, sitting beside him, could no longer hold back. "You've been coming and going for days because of this land, and now you're still exchanging messages like this. Explain yourself now." Chloe looked from her uncle to her father, her face confused. Maybe it was only now that she realized how quickly money could change a person. Uncle Walter clutched his phone tightly. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I just wanted what's best for the family." He laughed, a very short, bitter laugh. In the almost 8 years I had lived in this house, I had never seen him laugh like that. "Continue." Uncle Walter swallowed hard. "I see that company is big. If we sell quickly, we're sure to profit." My father-in-law nodded. "And if we don't sell?" Uncle Walter fell silent. He knew he couldn't answer. Everything was already too clear. Suddenly, my mother-in-law stood up. She was a person who cared deeply about appearances, who hated being lied to, especially by her own family. Walter. Yes, Helen? I'm asking you honestly. Have you already taken money from them? The atmosphere instantly froze solid. I myself hadn't expected my mother-in-law to be so direct. Uncle Walter's face turned red. What are you talking about? Just answer the question. No. Are you sure? My mother-in-law's voice grew sharper. Uncle Walter started to panic. None of you believe me? My father-in-law looked straight at his brother. I'm trying to believe you, but you're the one making it difficult. Silence enveloped them. Finally, Uncle Walter stood up. Fine. Think whatever you want. My intentions were good for the family. After saying that, he grabbed his folder and was about to walk out. But just then I spoke up. Uncle... He turned around. I looked at the stack of papers in his hand. May I see the original document? Everyone turned to me. Uncle Walter was a bit taken aback. The original of what? The inheritance letter from your parents. What for? Because a copy isn't enough. Uncle Walter immediately refused. That's not necessary. I smiled. Are you afraid, Uncle? His face flushed. What are you talking about? I didn't answer, just looked at him. Sometimes silence is more pressuring than an argument. Sure enough, after a few seconds, Uncle Walter looked away. We'll talk about it later. He then hurried out. The car had just disappeared down the street. The house was still quiet. Chloe was the first to break the silence. I think Uncle Walter is being really weird. My mother-in-law sighed. Me too. My father-in-law leaned back in his chair. He seemed to have aged drastically in just a few days. Land that had been abandoned for over 20 years. The moment it became valuable, it brought all sorts of problems. That afternoon, I asked to leave work early. Not because of the land, but because of my father-in-law. Since he had fainted, his health hadn't fully recovered. I took him for a checkup. On the way home, we sat drinking iced tea under a shady tree near the hospital. He watched the traffic and then suddenly asked me, Do you think I'm greedy, Alara? I was stunned. No. Why would you ask that? The money is too big. Suddenly, everyone has changed. I was silent. He smiled wryly. Back when we were poor, we were so close as brothers. We'd split a single sweet potato. Now, we haven't even seen the money, and it's already like this. I looked at his wrinkled hands and remembered what my mother-in-law had said the other day. People who have known poverty often carry many fears. They just show them in different ways. My father-in-law continued, Walter and I used to sleep on the same bed. If the roof leaked, we'd move over together. Once he had a fever. I carried him more than 2 miles to the clinic. He smiled, a sad smile. And now, suddenly, we're suspicious of each other. I didn't know what to say because I understood what was hurting him wasn't the money, but the bond of brotherhood that was beginning to crack. That night, something else happened. Around 8 o'clock, as we were having dinner, there was a knock on the door. Chloe opened it. An elderly woman of about 60 stood outside, wearing a simple brown dress. Her face was friendly, though she looked tired. The moment he saw her, my father-in-law stood up. Great Aunt Louise. I was surprised. It turned out she was the sister of Ethan's grandmother. She had lived in the country for years and rarely came to the city. Great Aunt Louise came in, sat down, and accepted a cup of tea from my mother-in-law. Then she looked at all of us. I've heard everything about the land. No one spoke. She sighed. So old, and still can't find peace. My father-in-law sat beside her. Aunt Louise, what brings you here? She looked at him, and then slowly opened the cloth bag she was carrying. Inside was an old wooden box. Its color had faded with time. You could tell just by looking at it that it was very old. Chloe was curious. What's that, Auntie? She didn't answer right away, just placed the box on the table and took out a small key to open it. Everyone watched intently. Inside were a few old notebooks, some letters, and a yellowed envelope that had turned brown. Great Aunt Louise took the envelope and placed it in front of my father-in-law. Before she passed away, your mother entrusted this to me. Instantly, everyone in the house held their breath. My father-in-law took the envelope. His hand was trembling slightly. What is this, Auntie? Read it yourself. He opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The ink had faded in some parts, but it was still legible. I saw his expression change from surprise to shock, and then freeze. My mother-in-law was anxious. What does it say, Arthur? He didn't answer. Chloe was impatient. Dad? Her father remained silent. After a very long pause, my father-in-law slowly placed the letter on the table. His gaze was distant, looking out into the dark yard. His voice was hoarse. It can't be. I had never seen him like this. Even when he found out about the land dispute, he wasn't this distraught. Great Aunt Louise looked at everyone and then said slowly, "If that letter is true, then the document Walter brought might not reflect the whole truth." The room fell silent. My father-in-law clutched the letter tightly, because the last few lines from his late mother had just revealed a secret that had been buried for almost 30 years. A secret that could completely change the ownership of the land that was tearing this family apart. That night, no one could sleep. The letter lay on the living room table. No one dared to put it away. No one wanted to leave it. After everyone had calmed down a bit, my father-in-law read the entire contents aloud for us to hear. It was the handwriting of Ethan's grandmother. The purple ink had faded, the paper yellowed, but every word was still very clear. In the letter, she recounted events from nearly 30 years ago. At that time, their family was struggling financially. Grandpa had passed away early, and she was raising the children alone. The land was originally divided in two. One part was in my father-in-law's name, the other was planned for Uncle Walter. But then Uncle Walter moved away, got into debt, and even pawned the land title. It was my father-in-law who sold the cows in the barn to redeem it. From that day on, the grandmother decided to consolidate the management of all the land under her eldest son to prevent family assets from being constantly pawned. At the end of the letter, there was one sentence that made everyone fall silent. "I know this decision will sadden Walter, but if anything happens later, remember that this land is the reward for the child who stayed to bear the family's burden." My father-in-law stopped reading there, his hand trembling slightly. No one spoke. Even Chloe sat quietly. Great Aunt Louise sighed. "Back then, your mother cried so often. She kept this letter for years before finally entrusting it to me." My mother-in-law stared at the letter, her expression slowly changing. Since this land issue began, this was the first time I saw her truly thinking. Not calculating, not worrying, but thinking. After a long pause, she finally asked, "Then why didn't she just say so at the time?" Great Aunt Louise smiled sadly. "Your mother was afraid you two would fall out as brothers." That answer silenced the entire house. A mother who, her whole life, only hoped her children would get along. Even until her death, she was still trying to hide things that could cause division. But sometimes, time creates its own stories. The next morning when I came downstairs, my father-in-law was already at the dining table. He was drinking tea. In front of him was the letter, and beside it was the stack of papers Uncle Walter had brought. I pulled up a chair and sat down. "You're up early, Arthur." He smiled faintly. "I'm old." I knew that wasn't the reason. He was thinking very hard. A moment later, he suddenly asked, "What do you think of Walter as a person?" I was a bit surprised. "You want my honest opinion?" "Yes, be honest." I thought for a moment. "In my opinion, Uncle Walter isn't a bad person." My father-in-law looked at me. Then, "But he's afraid of losing out." He laughed, a very bitter laugh. "That's right. Ever since he was a kid, he was afraid of losing out." He began to reminisce. Back then, if there was a cake, it had to be divided equally. If his piece was even a little smaller, he would get angry. If he was teased at school, he'd run and tell. If his boss yelled at him at work, he'd quit. All his life, Uncle Walter had been worried he would be the one to get the short end of the stick. Hearing that, I understood him better. Some people are greedy not because they love money, but because deep down, they always have a fear of loss, a fear of being left behind, a fear of getting less than others. That feeling builds up over the years and becomes a habit. Around 9 in the morning, my father-in-law's phone rang. It was Uncle Walter. He stared at the screen for a long time before answering. The voice on the other end sounded tired. "Arthur." "Yes. Can we meet somewhere?" "The cafe across from the market." My father-in-law agreed. After hanging up, he looked at me. "You're coming with me." I was a bit surprised. "Me, Arthur?" "Yes." I didn't refuse. An hour later, the two of us were sitting in a small cafe on the side of the highway. Uncle Walter was already there, sitting alone in a corner. Unlike his aggressive demeanor the other day, today he looked utterly exhausted. Seeing his brother arrive, he immediately stood up. My father-in-law pulled up a chair. Without any preamble, he placed the letter on the table. Uncle Walter saw it, and his expression immediately changed. "You know?" "I know." "Then talk." Silence filled the space between them. The soft music in the cafe and the sound of traffic outside were faint. Finally, Uncle Walter sighed. I was wrong. My father-in-law didn't answer, just waited. Uncle Walter looked down. I knew about this back then. When Mom was still alive, she told me. Sitting beside them, I felt my heart skip a beat, so he knew. He had known for a long time. My father-in-law remained calm. And? I got angry. Angry. And then what? I left. His uncle's voice grew smaller. Ever since then, I always thought Mom played favorites. Why? Because I was always given everything? My father-in-law smiled faintly. If our positions were reversed, would you have stayed home to take care of Mom? Uncle Walter was silent. Would you have dropped out of school to work and help pay for your sister's education? Still silent. Would you have sold your own cattle to pay off someone else's debt? His uncle bowed his head deeply, unable to answer. Those questions weren't meant to win an argument, but to remind him of the truth. The truth is sometimes simpler than we think. The one who bears more receives more. The one who leaves finds it hard to retain the same rights as when they stayed. I thought the conversation would soften from there. It didn't. Because just then, someone suddenly walked into the cafe, the man from the real estate company. He was a bit surprised to see my father-in-law, but quickly regained his composure. But what caught my attention wasn't his face, but Uncle Walter's reaction. He turned pale. It was clear they knew each other, and it seemed they were quite familiar. The man approached. "Oh, you gentlemen are here too." My father-in-law looked at him, didn't invite him to sit, didn't answer. The atmosphere immediately became awkward. The man smiled stiffly, then turned to Uncle Walter. "You got here early, sir." With just that one sentence, everything became clear. Uncle Walter closed his eyes like a man whose final curtain had just been drawn. My father-in-law put down his teacup. "I understand now." His voice was very quiet, but it was its softness that was unbearable. The man was silent for a few seconds, then realized he could no longer hide anything. He sat down and looked straight at my father-in-law. "All right, I'll be honest." The atmosphere instantly tensed. He pulled his chair closer, then revealed a fact that even I hadn't suspected. 2 months ago, Mr. Walter here signed a preliminary agreement with our company. The spoon in my hand clattered onto the table, while my father-in-law sat frozen. Because that meant, when the entire family didn't even know about the development plans, someone had secretly promised to sell land that wasn't entirely his. That confession silenced the entire cafe. I turned to Uncle Walter. He didn't deny it, didn't refute it, just looked down at the table. That alone was enough to explain everything. My father-in-law sat up straight, his face strangely calm. But anyone who knew him would know, the calmer he was, the deeper the wound. Because the person sitting opposite him wasn't a stranger, but his own brother. The person he had shared a bed with, whom he had carried to the clinic, whose debts he had helped pay off time and time again. The man from the real estate company cleared his throat. "I think this needs to be clarified." My father-in-law turned to him. The man took out a stack of papers from his bag and placed them on the table. "This is the Memorandum of Understanding." I took it to look. Sure enough, a letter of agreement. Inside, it was clearly written that if the acquisition or compensation process was successful, the company would get first priority for negotiations. In return, Uncle Walter received a sum of assistance money up front. Not a huge amount, but enough to tempt someone. My father-in-law looked at his brother. "You took the money?" Uncle Walter closed his eyes. "I did." "Since when?" "Over 2 months ago." The ceiling fan in the cafe spun. Its sound became clearer because no one was talking anymore. I saw my father-in-law's hands clench into fists, his veins bulging. He wasn't angry, he didn't slam the table, he didn't blame him. He just asked one more thing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Uncle Walter smiled sadly. "If I had told you, would you have agreed? At least I would have known." I was scared. For the first time, he spoke honestly. A man over 50, his hair already graying, sat in the middle of a bustling cafe and uttered 3 words. I was scared. It sounded both pathetic and culpable. Scared of what? Scared I'd be left with nothing. My father-in-law looked at his brother, his gaze slowly softening. I understood him. He was remembering the past, remembering his youngest brother who was always afraid of losing out, always afraid his rights would be taken by others. The man from the real estate company sensed the situation was not in his favor. He sighed like cider sieve. Ciders. Centine into family matters are best resolved internally. With that, he was about to leave. But I called out to him. "Wait a minute." He stopped. I put down the stack of papers. "You knew perfectly well this land was under dispute, yet you still made the agreement." He smiled cynically. "In business, it's first come, first served." That sentence sent a shiver down my spine. That's how business people think, but it's also why so many families are destroyed. The money isn't even there yet, and people are already setting traps. After he left, it was just the three of us. A moment later, my father-in-law stood up to go home. He didn't look at his brother, didn't say another word. It was his silence that made Uncle Walter panic. He ran after him. "Arthur!" My father-in-law stopped. I know I was wrong. He remained silent. "I'll return the money. I'll cancel the agreement." My father-in-law turned around, his eyes red. "I don't regret the money." "Then what do you regret?" "I regret that you didn't trust me." That sentence made Uncle Walter stand frozen in the cafe's parking lot. Throughout the drive home, no one spoke. I sat in the back, looking at my father-in-law's back, and suddenly felt sorry for him. Some wounds come not from outsiders, but from those closest to us. That evening, the whole house knew what had happened. Chloe had the strongest reaction. "What? Uncle Walter took money in advance?" My mother-in-law sank weakly into a chair. After a long pause, she sighed. "I really can't believe it." My father-in-law didn't say much, just explained briefly and then went up to his room to rest. I knew he was tired. Not physically, but emotionally. That night, for the first time since the land issue began, the entire family ate in silence. Chloe would occasionally look at her father, wanting to say something but hesitating. Ethan also became quieter. Only my mother-in-law was different. She kept drifting off, her chopsticks often pausing in midair. Around 9 o'clock, as everyone was getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. Chloe opened it. A moment later, she ran back in. "Mom, Uncle Walter is here." Everyone was surprised. My father-in-law sat still, saying nothing. Uncle Walter came in carrying a paper bag. His face was gaunt. He looked like he had aged 10 years in just a few days. He put the bag on the table, and then suddenly dropped his face into his hands. The atmosphere in the house instantly froze. I had never seen a sight like this. A brother over 50 years old, breaking down and sobbing in front of his older brother. His voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry." My father-in-law looked at him, not answering. "I was wrong. I was greedy. I was thinking too much about the money." My mother-in-law looked away. Chloe sat silently. Ethan sighed softly. Uncle Walter opened the paper bag. Inside was a stack of cash. "This is the money they gave me. I haven't touched it. You take it, Arthur." My father-in-law still refused to take it. He just asked, "After you return it, then what?" I feel relieved. This time, my father-in-law smiled. A very sad smile. Money can't buy relief. Uncle Walter was choked up, unable to say another word. I thought the conversation would end there. It didn't. Just then, my phone vibrated. Alex, my friend from the county records office. I stepped outside to take the call. Alex's voice was very rushed. "Ilara!" "What is it, Alex?" "Where are you?" "At home." "Tell your family, quickly." "Why?" "Someone just filed a lawsuit over that land." I was shocked. "Who?" "I don't have the details yet, but the case was just filed at the county court. The plaintiff's name isn't Walter." I stood frozen. "Not Uncle Walter? Then who else?" While the whole family was trying to heal a fresh wound, someone else had quietly entered the game. I went back inside. Everyone immediately looked at me. "What is it, Ilara?" I took a deep breath and then said slowly, "Someone has filed a lawsuit over our land." Instantly, everyone in the house stood up. But what shocked them even more was the name on the lawsuit that Alex had just read to me. Because that person was no stranger. It was the woman who had come a few days ago to arrange a match for Uncle Walter's son. The matchmaker. Chloe was the first to speak, her tone one of sheer disbelief. "Irene Summers?" I nodded. "That's right, Irene Summers." My mother-in-law frowned. "That's impossible." I understood her reaction. The woman had only appeared a few days ago. She was polite, soft-spoken, always smiling. From any angle, she didn't seem like someone who would be involved in this family's land dispute. But Alex wasn't one to joke, especially about official documents. My father-in-law sat up straighter. "Call him again. Get the details." I immediately called Alex back. As soon as he picked up, I put it on speaker. Everyone listened intently. Alex's voice came through. I just double-checked. "The plaintiff is one Irene Summers." My mother-in-law looked at me. "The name is correct, no mistake." My father-in-law asked, "What's the basis of the lawsuit?" I relayed the question. "On the other end," Alex replied, "she claims that the land is tied to her family's rights." The living room fell silent. Chloe wrinkled her nose. "Tied how?" Alex continued. I can't read the whole file yet, but it says there's proof in old documents. This time, even I was confused. Old documents from where? Since this compensation issue arose, we'd had Uncle Walter's version, then the grandmother's will, and now another document from a near stranger. My father-in-law sighed softly. This is getting more complicated. After the call ended, no one wanted to sleep. Everyone sat back down at the dining table. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead. Each person was lost in their own thoughts. Just then, Uncle Walter suddenly spoke. I know Irene Summers. Everyone turned to him at once. My mother-in-law immediately asked, You know her? Why didn't you say so from the beginning? Uncle Walter looked awkward. I just remembered. Remembered what? A long time ago, she used to live near that land. I was surprised. Does she have any connection to our family? Uncle Walter hesitated for a moment before saying, Back when we were young, I think she had a crush on Arthur. The entire room fell silent. Even my father-in-law was stunned. Chloe's eyes widened. What? I looked at my father-in-law. For the first time since this land issue began, he looked genuinely bewildered. My mother-in-law immediately turned to her husband. You hid this from me? My father-in-law cleared his throat. I forgot about it too. Chloe laughed. Wow, Dad, you were quite the catch. The tension that had built up for days suddenly broke. Even Uncle Walter smiled. Arthur was very popular back then. My father-in-law shook his head. Don't talk nonsense. But I noticed his ears were a little red. My mother-in-law looked at her husband, then at all of us. Finally, she herself started to laugh. Married for almost 40 years, and I'm only hearing this now. The laughter was quiet, but it was enough to make the house feel less suffocating. However, after the laughter died down, everyone returned to reality. Whatever the old story was, the lawsuit was real. The next morning, my father-in-law decided to go to the county courthouse. I went with him. This time, Uncle Walter asked to come along too. He wanted to clear things up. There wasn't much conversation in the car. When we arrived, we were directed to meet with an official. After checking the file, the clerk shook his head. The lawsuit is still under review. We can't release the full contents. My father-in-law nodded. I understand. But I want to know the reason. The clerk looked at him, perhaps seeing his earnestness, and then lowered his voice. Miss Summers claims her family had a hand in clearing that land. I was stunned. My father-in-law was also shocked. Clearing the land? That's right, sir. The clerk opened a copy of a document. It's mentioned here in her filing. We left with an even heavier feeling. On the way back, my father-in-law barely spoke, just stared out the window. Only after the car stopped at a small roadside diner did he say, I need to get out for a minute. We sat under a simple tarp roof. The owner served us iced tea. My father-in-law took a sip and then suddenly began to talk. Our family used to be poor. I knew he was reminiscing. Very poor. That land back home was just a field of weeds. Nobody wanted it. He smiled. If you wanted to plant anything, you had to pull the tree stumps yourself, clear the timber yourself, and put up the fencing yourself. I listened intently. Uncle Walter was also silent. At that time, many people helped, including Irene's family. I was shocked. So it's true? My father-in-law nodded. I have a faint memory, but yes, it's true. He put down his glass. I just never thought that after decades, that story would come up again. That afternoon, as soon as we got home, we saw a car parked at the gate. The person sitting in the living room was Irene Summers. This time, she came alone. There was no friendly smile like before. No more talk of matchmaking. There was just a folder on the table. My mother-in-law sat opposite her, her face serious. Chloe sat beside her, not daring to speak. Irene saw my father-in-law enter and stood up. Her gaze was complicated, like seeing an old acquaintance she hadn't met in a very long time. My father-in-law nodded slowly. Good afternoon, Irene. Good afternoon, Arthur. The atmosphere was so strange it was hard to describe. A moment later, Irene finally spoke. I didn't come here to cause trouble. Then why are you here? She looked at the folder on the table. I came to tell you everything. The room fell silent. She opened the folder. Inside were not land documents, but old, yellowed black and white photos. The first photo was of a group of people standing in the middle of an empty field. The second was of a makeshift hut. The third photo shocked everyone, because in it was my father-in-law as a young man, and standing beside him was a young girl. It was Irene in her youth. My mother-in-law stared at the photo without a word. Chloe was dumbfounded. My father-in-law sat frozen. Irene gently placed the photo down and then uttered a single sentence that stunned everyone. I didn't come to ask for the land. I came for the sake of someone who is gone. The room fell silent, and when she took out an old notebook from the folder, on the first page of which was written the name of Ethan's grandmother, I knew that the biggest secret of this land might not have been fully revealed yet. The moment the notebook was placed on the table, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Irene Summers didn't open it right away. She stroked the cover, its corners worn with age. Her movements were slow and careful, as if touching a piece of a long-held memory. My father-in-law stared at the book. His expression slowly changed. I remember this book. Irene nodded slowly. I knew you would. My mother-in-law, sitting across from her, said nothing. But I noticed she was no longer as tense as before. Perhaps after all that had happened, she was beginning to understand that not everyone who came was after money. Irene opened the book. The first page showed the handwriting of Ethan's grandmother. Right below it was a line of notes in faded ink. People who helped the family in hard times. I saw my father-in-law's hand tremble slightly. Chloe leaned in to see. Page after page was turned. Names of people, dates, small loans, help with labor, treats of food, days spent clearing the land, everything was meticulously recorded. On a page near the end, Irene stopped. Her finger pointed to one line, family of Mr. Johnson. Then she looked at my father-in-law. That was my father. The room was silent. She continued, my family was poor, and your family was poor. Poor people helped each other with their labor. My mother and I cleared weeds on that land for almost 2 months. My father-in-law nodded. I remember that too. Irene's voice was soft, not accusing, not demanding, just recounting. When the land was finally ready for planting, my family moved away. We lost contact after that. Chloe couldn't help herself. Then why did you sue, Aunt Irene? Irene laughed, a laugh that sounded a bit resigned. I didn't sue. Everyone looked up at once. What? I never filed a lawsuit. This time, it was my turn to be stunned. My father-in-law frowned. But the county said there was a lawsuit. There is, but I'm not the one who filed it. The atmosphere changed instantly. My back went cold. If it wasn't Irene, then who was using her name? My mother-in-law clenched her fists. What is the meaning of this? Irene took a piece of paper from her bag and placed it on the table. I only found out yesterday myself. I went to the county office to clarify. My name was used without my consent. Chloe was aghast. Someone forged it? Irene nodded. I glanced at my father-in-law. He was thinking very quickly. A moment later he asked, then why did you come here? Irene looked at the notebook. I was afraid you would misunderstand. I don't want to be labeled a land grabber, especially not from a family that once helped mine. No one spoke, only the sound of the ceiling fan. I looked at the woman before me and suddenly felt sorry for her. She could have ignored it, but she came herself just to explain. At a time when others were fighting for their rights, she came to avoid a misunderstanding. Life is strange sometimes. The person with the least at stake was the most dignified. Just then, my phone vibrated. Alex, I answered immediately. His voice was rushed on the other end. Alara, there's an update. I put him on speaker so everyone could hear. The county just reviewed the filing. There's a problem with the signature on the lawsuit. My father-in-law sat up straighter. What do you mean, Alex? The signature doesn't match. There are indications of forgery. My mother-in-law took a deep breath. Chloe covered her mouth, and I immediately thought of someone. The person who had been there from the beginning, who wanted everything to go quickly, who knew about the development plans before we did the representative from the real estate company. I hadn't even said it when Alex continued. More importantly, the person who filed the paperwork didn't come alone. Who was with them? A lawyer. My father-in-law frowned. Whose lawyer? I don't have the name yet, but they said he works for a corporation. The house fell silent again. Everything was starting to connect. The puzzle pieces were forming a picture. That afternoon, after Irene left, the whole family sat together. This time, no one was talking about dividing money or making calculations. Everyone realized the biggest problem now wasn't the money, but finding out who the mastermind was behind all of this. My father-in-law turned to me. What do you think, Alara? I thought for a moment. I think that person wants to stall for time. Why? Because the messier it gets, the easier it is to buy it for a low price. Ethan nodded. You're right. If the family is fighting, if the documents are being challenged, if everyone distrusts each other, that's when someone will come in with an offer, and promised to solve everything. It's a common tactic. My mother-in-law sat in silence for a long time, then suddenly spoke. It was my fault. Everyone looked at her. She looked down. Ever since this land business started, I got carried away too. Chloe was surprised. Mom? My mother-in-law sighed. Every day, just calculating how much we'd get, how it would be divided. I forgot what was most important. No one interrupted. I realized that in just over a week, my mother-in-law had changed a lot. The woman who had told me to exchange the crabs for fear of being embarrassed in front of guests was now reflecting on herself. Perhaps this series of events had taught her a great deal. That night, for the first time in a long while, the entire family had dinner in a light atmosphere. No one discussed money, no one discussed land, just old stories. My father-in-law talked about his youth as a laborer. Chloe talked about being chased by a dog as a child. My mother-in-law even laughed, remembering the first time she met her husband. I looked at them all and thought back to the 20 pounds of crabs. If I had stayed quiet that day, if I had been patient just one more time, maybe we wouldn't be sitting together like this. Sometimes, a seemingly small thing can open the door to much bigger things. Around 10 o'clock, as everyone was getting ready for bed, the house phone rang. My father-in-law answered it. After a few sentences, his expression immediately changed. Is that right, Mr. Henderson? The whole house turned to look at him. He stood up. All right, I'll be right there. The call ended. Chloe was impatient. Who was it, Dad? My father-in-law looked at all of us. His voice was slow. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was an old neighbor from their hometown. He was over 70 and had lived next to the land for a long time. My mother-in-law asked, "What's wrong?" My father-in-law clutched the phone tightly. He just found an old sealed envelope from his late father, who was the town's notary public back then. My heart pounded. My father-in-law continued, "Inside is an unrecorded quitclaim deed." The entire house stood up. If that book really existed, if its contents were still intact, then all the arguments could finally end. But before he could step out the door, my father-in-law's cell phone rang again. An unknown number, he answered. Not 10 seconds later, his face suddenly went pale. He slowly lowered the phone. My mother-in-law was anxious. What is it now? He looked at all of us, his voice hoarse. The book is gone. The book is gone. My father-in-law's words froze the entire house. Chloe was the first to react. Gone? How, Dad? My father-in-law stared at his still-lit phone screen. His voice was heavy. Mr. Henderson just called back. He put the book in a wooden cabinet. When he went back, it was gone. My mother-in-law sank weakly into a chair. Oh, my goodness. Ethan clenched his fists. Someone stole it? We don't know. The atmosphere in the house tensed again like a guitar string. Just a few hours ago, everyone thought they were about to see a resolution. Now, the most important clue had vanished. I looked at my father-in-law. He stood very straight. His gaze was no longer tired like in the previous days. Instead, something had become clearer. A moment later, he said, "We're going to our hometown tomorrow." Everyone looked up. Yes, I want to see for myself. No one argued. Everyone understood this problem had gone too far. The next morning we left very early. This time, it wasn't just my father-in-law and me. My mother-in-law came. Ethan came, Chloe came, and even Uncle Walter asked to come along. The SUV sped through the morning fog. Throughout the journey, almost no one spoke. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts. 3 hours later, we arrived in the village. Mr. Henderson's house was on a small dirt road. He was already waiting outside. He was thin, his back slightly hunched, but his eyes were still clear. The moment he saw my father-in-law, he approached immediately. Arthur! Henderson! The two old men clasped hands tightly. It was a sight that, without realizing it, moved me. They were both over 70, meeting again after many years. But the first thing they had to talk about was a missing record book. After we went inside, Mr. Henderson told us everything. Yesterday, while cleaning out an old storage shed, he had accidentally found a box of old papers. Inside was the record book of the village clerk from long ago. Knowing its contents were related to the land, he intended to inform them. Who would have thought that after just going for tea with a neighbor, he returned to find the book gone? Chloe was impatient. Did anyone know you found the book? A few people. Who? Mr. Henderson thought for a moment, and then mentioned a few names. Among them was one name that caught my attention. His own nephew, who currently worked as a driver for that real estate company. My father-in-law and I looked at each other. Without needing to speak, we knew what the other was thinking. That afternoon, we went to the land itself. It was the first time in years I had seen the place that had caused such chaos for the entire family. A vast plot of land with green grass and a few old trees in the distance. If you didn't know its current value, you would never guess this place was worth fighting over. My father-in-law stood for a very long time, saying nothing, just looking. Then, he suddenly turned to Uncle Walter. "Remember this place?" Uncle Walter nodded. "I remember. We used to grow corn and keep a few head of cattle here." My father-in-law's voice softened. "I remember." The atmosphere suddenly became calmer. Old memories have a strange power. They remind people of who they were before they became entangled in calculations. Just then, my phone rang. "Alex." I answered immediately. His voice on the other end was very enthusiastic. "Alara." "What is it, Alex?" "I just found something." "Something what?" "Maybe more important than that record book." My heart pounded. "What is it?" "A digitized scan." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" "A while back, the county office had a program to digitize old archives. I just remembered. It wasn't everything, but some important pages were saved." I almost held my breath. "Is there anything relevant?" "There is." I put him on speaker so everyone could hear. Alex continued. "In the data, there's one page that clearly records the decision letter for the land use rights adjustment." My father-in-law came closer. "What does it say?" The signatory was the village head at the time, and the name designated as the full manager of the land is your father's name, Arthur. Instantly, we all looked at each other. My mother-in-law placed a hand on her chest. Chloe breathed a sigh of relief. Even Uncle Walter sat down on the grass, as if a heavy burden had just been lifted. But that happiness didn't last long. Alex continued. "Wait a minute." Everyone tensed up again. "What else?" "The scan is incomplete. The last page is missing." I closed my eyes. Of course, life is rarely that easy. The last page is usually the most important part, where conditions, notes, or additional endorsements are recorded. Everything was hanging in the balance again. That night, the whole family stayed in the village. I lay in an old room, listening to the sounds of the night insects, unable to sleep. Around 11 o'clock, I went down to the kitchen for a drink. I saw my father-in-law sitting alone on the porch. The yellow light illuminated his thoughtful face. I pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "You're not asleep yet, Arthur?" He smiled. "I'm old." I chuckled. "You use that line a lot." He laughed too. A moment later, he said, "Do you know what I'm most afraid of? It's not losing the land." I looked at him. "Then what?" "I'm afraid of losing my family." I fell silent. He looked out at the dark yard. "If this land makes us stop speaking to each other as brothers, if because of money, my children and grandchildren don't get along, then even getting $10 million would be meaningless." I understood. That was what had been hurting him the most all this time. Not the money, but the family bond. Just then, footsteps came from inside the house. It was Uncle Walter. He was carrying 2 cups of hot tea. He silently placed one in front of his brother. No one spoke. The 3 of us just sat there in the middle of the night, listening to the village wind. A moment later, Uncle Walter finally spoke. "Arthur." "Yes. If, in the end, I don't get a single penny, I'll accept it." My father-in-law turned to him. "Don't talk like that." "I'm serious." His uncle's voice choked. "I've done so much wrong." My father-in-law looked at his brother for a long time, then slowly shook his head. "This isn't over yet. But there's one thing I know." "What's that?" "No matter whose land this is, you're still my brother." I saw Uncle Walter's eyes turn red. He turned his face away, not wanting anyone to see. The next morning, as everyone was getting ready to return to the city, a motorcycle suddenly stopped at the gate. The person who got off was Mr. Henderson's nephew, the driver for the real estate company. He walked into the yard with a tense face. In his hand was a black plastic bag. As soon as he saw my father-in-law, he bowed his head. "Son, what is it?" He swallowed hard and then slowly placed the bag on the table. "I couldn't sleep last night." His trembling hands opened the bag. Inside was an old, yellowed document with a raised notary seal. Instantly, everyone in the yard stood up. It was the missing record book. But what shocked everyone even more was the young man's next sentence. "Please, sir, read the last page first." The atmosphere froze. My father-in-law slowly opened the book, going straight to the final page that had been sought for days. My father-in-law opened the book very slowly. The entire yard was silent. Even the sound of the wind blowing through the bamboo grove at the end of the lane was audible. The last page was a deep yellow, worn by time. Its corner was slightly torn, but the content was still intact. My father-in-law put on his glasses, read line by line, and then read it again. His hand trembled slightly. My mother-in-law was impatient. "Well, Arthur?" Chloe leaned in closer. I stood beside him and saw my father-in-law's eyes slowly turn red. After a long silence, he handed the book to me. I looked down and read it. Right below the legal jargon confirming the transfer of the land, there was a typed paragraph with a raised notary seal. The content was very clear. This property is entirely transferred to Arthur, in accordance with his late mother's wishes, and agreed upon by all parties present. Below it was a list of signatures. Irene Summers' mother was a witness, Mr. Henderson's father was the notary, and right at the bottom, clearly signed in blue ink, was Uncle Walter's name. I looked up. Everyone understood. The entire debate was practically over. Uncle Walter slumped into a wooden chair in the yard, his face pale. He stared intently at the record book, then suddenly laughed, a very sad laugh. So, I did sign it. No one blamed him. Everyone understood. Decades had passed. Many things become blurred by time. Some things are truly forgotten, and some are intentionally forgotten because one doesn't want to remember. The young driver who had brought the book, who had been looking down the whole time, finally spoke. "I'm sorry, sir." Everyone looked at him. The young man explained. The day before, he had overheard his manager at the real estate company talking about the record book. He got curious. After finding out Mr. Henderson had it, he secretly took it with the intention of handing it over to another party. But he couldn't sleep last night. The more he thought about it, the more wrong it felt. This morning, he decided to return it. My father-in-law didn't scold him, only said, "It's good that you decided to return it." The young man bowed his head deeply, then excused himself and left. That afternoon, everyone returned to the city. From the moment we got in the car until we arrived home, no one mentioned dividing the land or the money anymore. It felt like after days of tension, everyone was tired. Tired of suspicion, tired of calculating, tired of holding too much in. 2 weeks later, the county office officially announced the results of their verification. The lawsuit from Irene Summers was proven to be fraudulent and was dismissed. The agreement Uncle Walter signed with the real estate company had no legal standing. The company itself was investigated for violations related to gathering city planning information. The land issue was finally over. My father-in-law was the legal rights holder, according to all documents and regulations. The day he received the official letter, no one cheered, no one threw a party, no one showed off. There was just a quiet sense of relief that settled over the house. That night, my father-in-law called everyone to gather. Me, Ethan, Chloe, my mother-in-law, and even Uncle Walter. For the first time in years, Uncle Walter had voluntarily come for dinner. The meal was simple, classic pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Nothing fancy, and no one cared. In the middle of the meal, my father-in-law put down his spoon. "I've made a decision." Everyone looked at him. He said slowly, "A portion of the compensation money will be used to renovate the church in the village." Uncle Walter looked down, saying nothing. "Another portion will be saved for your mother." He looked at my mother-in-law, and she nodded slowly. "The rest." He turned to his brother. "You will still get a share." Uncle Walter was shocked. "Arthur, listen first." He smiled. "If Mom were still alive, this is what she would have wanted too." Tears immediately streamed down Uncle Walter's face. The man, over 50 years old, sat silently at the dining table, his shoulders shaking slightly. All this time, he had lived in fear of losing his rights. In the end, he realized that what he had almost lost wasn't money, but his brother. He stood up, his face buried in his hands, crying silently. "I'm so sorry, Arthur." My father-in-law stood up, walked around the table, and pulled his brother into a tight embrace. He patted Walter's back heavily, before gently pushing him back into his seat. "Eat first." Just those 2 words made everyone at the table choke up. My mother-in-law quietly turned her face to wipe her eyes. Chloe's eyes were also red. Ethan let out a long sigh. As for me, looking at them all, I felt an immense sense of relief. After that incident, everything slowly returned to normal. Chloe changed the most. She no longer liked to criticize as she used to. Once, I bought a basket of peaches. Chloe picked one up, looked at it, and then laughed. "Good thing I'm not criticizing this. I laughed. I dare you to try. No way. My mother-in-law, sitting beside us, joined in the laughter. The story of the 20 pounds of crabs had since become a family joke. Whenever we had guests, Chloe would say, "Remember, don't criticize Alara's cooking." My mother-in-law would pretend to pout. "You still remember that?" Then she herself would start to laugh. What surprised me most was one weekend morning. I had just come home from the farmer's market. As I walked into the kitchen, I saw my mother-in-law sorting through crabs. A large styrofoam cooler sat on the floor. She looked up at me. "I'm going to see your mother this afternoon." I was surprised. "What for, Helen?" "You brought them crabs before. Now I'm going to return the favor." I couldn't help but laugh. "Keeping score, are we?" She laughed too. "And to get a free meal while I'm at it." That afternoon, our entire family went to my mother's house. The small yard was once again filled with laughter. Aunt Carol was still telling stories. Uncle Ray was still cracking jokes. My mother saw my mother-in-law and laughed. "Bringing the big crabs this time, I see?" "Oh, you." My mother-in-law's face turned red. The entire yard roared with laughter. Even my father-in-law laughed until he had tears in his eyes. A pot of steamed crabs was placed in the middle of the yard, steam billowing from it. I sat beside Ethan, watching my relatives laughing all around me. I remembered that afternoon a while back. Same crabs, same styrofoam cooler, but the feeling in my heart was completely different. That day, I had left with sadness. Today, everyone gathered with a sense of relief and mutual understanding. Some things may seem to start with 20 pounds of crabs, but they really start with people's willingness to look back at themselves. The sun slowly set behind a row of maple trees. Laughter still echoed in the small yard. My mother-in-law was trying to crack a crab claw when she pinched her finger. Chloe immediately laughed the loudest. "Serves you right,"